Good morning, Tahoka. Good morning, Hale Center. I'm looking at a document that ought to be posted. What happened to post? There is post. Well, the lights are on anyway. For some reason, when we knocked off last time, it seems to me we were looking at pictures of Queen Elizabeth's favorite pirate friends.
Yeah.
The sea captains, we were talking about them.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of backtracking a little bit, but I guess it's fair enough. Can you hear me out there all right, guys? Post is just getting kind of plugged in. What happened, Post? Where did you guys go? No one has a mic. I know they have a mic in there. First calling Post, someone speak. I'm gonna get up and go woof woof. There you go.
Good morning.
Good morning. I knew someone had a vocal cord. Okay. I just had faith. Can everybody hear me all right? Tahoka, are you doing any better with sound?
Got a thumbs up.
He's running to the microphone.
You have to
Natalie, you're on
Not,
I can hear
I can hear. Now turn it off. I heard enough. Kind of like my dear old departed dad that would sit there in the room, the old colonel would sit there in the room, and if you watched him carefully when he got tired of listening to people, he casually reached up and looked like he was scratching his earlobe, but he was just turning off his hearing aid. So he didn't have to hear. I need something like that, I guess. Okay.
That's what I do.
Well, then you can go too far the other way. I have a grandson who, you yell and scream at him that food's ready, and we'll walk in the room and he's got those soundproof earphones on, and I'm going to rip them in shreds. So, you know, you can't have it both ways, I guess. Okay, while I'm working my way into this thing, we've already got a third quiz up and a third set of readings up and all of that. So let's not anybody start sliding backwards on that. If you owe me something or you need to tell me something, you need to get on the message center and tell me what your issue is. I think we took care of a couple of young ladies re-quizzing over the weekend, so that was good. Not to mention any names, Health Center. Okay. Hello, where am I? I'm going to put up this thing on English exploration and colonies and see where it takes us. I'd rather talk about Henry VIII and all his wives, but I think we've got to move on from that. Or we could talk about Bloody Mary again.
Yeah, we can go through that.
But then that makes me sad because I don't have one.
You wonder what's in mine.
We're talking about Elizabeth, and it's just my opinion, but I think she was probably the greatest monarch that England ever had, as far as in the formative years of that country. We talked about some of the early explorers like John Cabot, Henry Hudson, known to the Dutch as Heinrich Hudson, the guy that got them set up in the Americas really before he got his own country set up. And we talked about the so-called pirate explorers. Let me see if I can get it to come up here. I'm flashing through pictures and nobody can see them. They look good to me anyway. There they are. John Hawkins, Francis Drake, Walter Raleigh, Cavendish, Frobisher, Grenville.
Still not up yet.
It's still not showing?
No, sir.
It was up for a minute.
Projector's not even on.
Well, I didn't turn that on. Do you want to see that projector? I'll turn that on. I thought you were following me on your computer, so.
Trying to. It's not wanting to load.
What is the machine doing now? Please check. Now it's moving. Hello? Okay, let's fight this fight. I know what, someone sabotaged my equipment here. Turn the switch off. It will come up. Have faith. Yes.
I don't know if that's one, but.
There we go.
We'll see.
I promised. There they are.
Up there.
The
old one.
You don't need to memorize these guys' names or anything, but just know that they were the heart of the British Navy, as well as probably the heart of the British income, or at least the Queen's income for a few years. John Hawkins did some slaving, did some stealing of gold and things like that, split it with the Queen. Also spent some time building the British Navy. Francis Drake circumnavigated the world, was very, very much hated by the Spanish because he stole one of their treasure galleons, which put a dent in their national income for 1 year. Martin Frobisher explored up around Hudson Bay, Newfoundland, Labrador. And Walter Raleigh did that very first attempt at a colony. The colony he got a commission or a charter for. We talked a little bit last time about the
1E English.
the form of English colonies.
Exploration.
In your readings that I put up this time, I kind of really summarized it, and I compared how the Spanish colonies were organized, and how the French colonies were organized or not, and how the English colonies were organized. And all the early English colonies will be charter colonies. That's where someone forms a company, like some kind of a joint venture, and they get a charter from the crown, from the king, that gives them permission to go to a certain place in the New World and set up a colony. They run it. They run the government, they do everything. They have to follow the charter that they've established and that's been approved by the crown. But that's about it. There's another kind of colony, and that's when a really, really rich guy that maybe the king owes him money or something, and he just wants a hunk of land to be his own, not as part of somebody else's, endeavor. That's called a proprietary colony, and we'll see some of those later on. And finally, when the crown just takes over a colony and supplies the governor and tells them how to run their government and all that, that's a royal colony. All these early ones are going to be charter, and Walter Raleigh tried to start a charter company down on the Carolina coast, inside those boundary islands where all the rich people live now, except when there's a hurricane. there was a little island that we'll call Roanoke. Why do I have the Battle of the Spanish Armada stuck in here? Because he settled Roanoke, or tried to, in 1585, but the people gave up and went home. They hitched a ride with somebody. I think it was Sir Francis Drake was coming by, and they kind of got out there and thumbed a ride, begged him to take them back to England. A second group he's going to send out in 1587. It's about almost 120 people. 90 men, 17 women, and 11 children. That's where the first European child will be born in North America. That's the little girl named Virginia Dare. Now, the idea was that they would, tell me if we've talked about this before. The idea was that they would start setting up the colony. The ship would go back to England, pick up more people, and come back. And the reason that I stuck in the Battle of the Spanish Armada was that their plan was interrupted. They dropped these poor folks off on this little island. They took off, they went back to England, and then nobody came back because they were busy fighting the Spanish Armada. So, and I also put the thing about the Waterguzen in there. Those are the Dutch sailors that didn't like the Spanish either. They were in love with the English. It's just they didn't like the Spanish.
Mhm.
Yeah, so, you know, your enemy is my enemy sort of thing. And they messed up the Spanish plan to invade England, but it still took a while to deal with the Spanish. And it was quite a threat to England because, remember, Spain had the biggest army in the world at the time, the most modern army. And so if they ever did get set foot on England, it would have been a big problem. But they never made it. At any rate, this colony, when someone finally gets back in 1590, there's nobody there. So it's always called the Lost Colony of Roanoke. My guess is that for survival's sake, maybe they were starving to death. The people joined in with one of the Indian tribes and became kind of part of them. Conversely, some people say maybe the Indians came over and killed them all. That's possible too. There's still people nosing around down there in that area. That's down south of a place called Pamlico, or a little bit north of a place called Pamlico Sound. But most of the area where they found relics is underwater, so it makes it a little bit more difficult to investigate.
Professor,
Yes, ma'am.
where do you find the PowerPoint at? I can't find it.
Where is the PowerPoint?
It's in Unit 2 lectures, French and English, 1E in the title.
The young lady in this room louses how it's in Unit 2 lectures.
It's the last one, 1E, English exploration.
The very last one, it says English exploration. It's 1E, English exploration.
Thank you very much.
You find it? Did you find it?
I think so.
I've got to be careful. I yell into this microphone sometimes.
We're on slide 23.
And we're on slide 23. Thank you very much,
Mhm.
Miss Director. This lady here is the person who's responsible. Every time you don't get to see the picture on the screen, that's because she forgot to point at me and say, show the picture. She's the director. Elizabeth died in 1603 without an heir. So she stipulates, or her council stipulates, that her cousin James VI, King of Scotland, will now become the King of England. He becomes James I of England. He's the first of a new family, the Stuart family. They're a branch of families descended from Henry VII, just like Elizabeth and her family was. He's not a politically skilled person like Elizabeth and Elizabeth's father and Elizabeth's grandfather. Yeah, I'm allergic to this place too. We had some sneezing. When Elizabeth dies and James takes over, a bunch of people are still interested in colonization, and they form a company they call the Virginia Company. Who's the Virginia Company named after? Somebody? Even give me a wrong answer, just give it a shot.
Some guy named Virginia.
It's not a guy named Virginia, no. Is that like a boy named Sue? No, it's named after the Virgin Queen, who is Elizabeth. In theory, anyway. She never had a husband. And this so-called place that they called Virginia was pretty much the whole Atlantic coastline of North America. They're going to get more specific. And some companies inside this big umbrella company are going to spring up, and they want to grab certain parts of this Virginia coastline. And one will be a company stationed in London. Their headquarters is in London, so they'll, strangely enough, call themselves the London Company. Another one's in the port city of Plymouth, so strangely enough, they'll call themselves the Plymouth Company. Sometimes you get confused because you hear the London Company, Plymouth Company, then you hear Virginia Company. Virginia Company was kind of just an overall name for all of it, for the time being. Things will change really fast, and it's hard for you to follow, and since we're not studying English history so much, we won't get into it, but they keep reorganizing as time goes by, as it gets bigger. Some really, really smart person, when they were designated who had what territory, caused the territories of the Virginia Company and the Plymouth Company to overlap. That's what this map is all about. Okay, in 1607, the London Company is going to get a charter, and they're going to try 2 colonies out. One's way up north, up near Maine, where Maine is now. They call that the Popham Colony. And one's down just inside the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. That's where that lower arrow is pointing, and that's going to be Jamestown Colony. It's a little colony on the banks of the James River. You'd never guess who that's named after.
James.
James the First, of course, otherwise known as James the Sixth of Scotland. Popham Colony gave up after a year, just like the first Roanoke attempt. They went home. I think one person died in the colony, so they saved a lot of lives, if nothing else. The others found their way up the James River and landed at a convenient-looking place because the land was kind of flat on the side of the river. They're going to name it Jamestown. I'm not going to get really, really deep into it. So, in the notes, there's some more detail about the early years of Jamestown. But I'm going to mention some important people in Jamestown. First of all, most of the people that were in this group, and they were all men, a lot of them were second sons. They're the son that doesn't inherit the money from daddy. So, you know, his daddy gives him enough money to get out of town and says, go make your own fortune. Most of them had no skills at all. And they figured they were going to go pick up gold on the ground or something, I don't know. But there was one experienced kind of a soldier of fortune by the name of John Smith, who had been given the job of taking care of these guys at the beginning, and it was like herding cats. There's 100 people that show up there, 100 men, no women, if I said that enough times. By the next year, by the spring of the next year, there's only going to be 30 some odd left. The rest are all dead. Starvation, they didn't know enough to come out of the rain, they weren't very good at building shelters, what have you. John Smith made contact with the indigenous people. I hope everyone's figured out who the indigenous people are. Hale Center, tell me what indigenous people are. Anybody, volunteer, come on.
Native Americans.
Okay, when you push the mic button down, don't put your face near it, because what we heard was something like this. So,
Native Americans.
Native Americans, I picked it up that time. Did you guys hear it? Okay, good. Yeah. Indigenous people are just whoever's there before. In the case of America, we call them Native Americans, some of us do. John Smith made contact with them. They were a bunch of small tribes, kind of what they call a confederation of tribes, that we'll call the Powhatans. You've heard that name before, thanks to Walt Disney. It wasn't the name of a chief, it was the name of the group. And on the slide I have there, so you can spell it for our next exam, the name of the guy that we all like to call Powhatan, and now you know why we call him Powhatan, because his name is Wahum Sonokah. Try that 3 times without spitting on your friends. He's going to help them out. Not all of the members of the Powhatan Confederacy agree with that. In fact, either it's his much younger brother or cousin or something. There's a guy named Opakano. And Opakano says, we better kill them all, they may multiply. Boy, was he right. But they didn't. Even so, in between 1608 and 1610 was a period of time they called the starving time. And during this period of time, some more people showed up. But if you get your nose in the history book, the numbers don't ever add up. Because you're looking at this many people that left England, and then you're looking at the population of the colony, and they don't add up. There's not enough people in the colony to cover all those people that left. And the question is, where'd they all go? Well, a lot of them died. There was a really high death rate there, and probably a whole lot of them got smart and split out for better terrain than Jamestown was. I mean, Jamestown was kind of a tidal flat, and it was pretty muddy. And nowadays, it's underwater altogether. One of the important people that came, and I think the second group, was a young man named John Rolfe, who was very curious about growing things. John Rolfe had passed through the Canary Islands, picked up some very mild tobacco there, brought seedlings with him. They got to Jamestown, and at some stage or another, some Indians shared tobacco with them, and the tobacco was really acrid and strong, but John Rolfe combined the two. He mixed the two and came up with a fairly mild kind of tobacco that tasted good. It sounds like I'm trying to teach you to smoke. I am not. But it became the first cash crop of Virginia colony, of the Virginia colonies in period. So if anybody, when I put that question on the exam, says it was cotton, I'll kill you. The British didn't want the Americans, even later on when the Americans got their colonies going and they had farms and things like that, the British did not want them growing cotton. It's kind of one of these deals like enclosure. The rich people were making money on wool. They didn't want competition from cotton. Besides that, for technical reasons, it was difficult to grow the right kind of cotton in the Americas, too far north. Okay, who else is important? Well, let's say it's Pocahontas, I guess. There were conflicts early on between some of the Indians and some of the colonists. And at one point or another, a youngster, by this stage of the game, maybe 13, something like that. When they first met her, she was about 11. We'll call her Pocahontas. Her name was Matoaka. They kidnapped her because they knew she was a favorite of Wahum Sonokah, and they figured that would control the Indians. And while she was in captivity, someone decided to teach her about Christianity. They baptized her, and somewhere along the line she fell in love with the young planter, John Rolfe. She did not fall in love with this much older guy, John Smith, despite what Walt Disney told you. In fact, when John Smith met her, she was 11. So, you know, he wasn't a pedophile. Once she's married to John Rolfe, they call her Lady Rebecca Rolfe. They take her back to England to show her off. She's kind of an oddity. I have to assume that she was a pretty young woman, because all the pictures you see of her are not so pretty. Maybe one. I think she met the king, but the weather didn't agree with her, and she felt homesick, and she wanted to go home. She had a child while she was there, and she started getting ill, so they loaded her up on the ship and started back for America, but before they even got out of sight of land, she died. I don't know what she had, pneumonia maybe. So she was buried in England. Strangely enough, that same year, the old man, Wahum Seneca, also died. This is 1618. And also, strangely enough, the man that was in charge over all of the colonies, he didn't really live there all the time. He visited, but he was in charge of organizing them, was a fellow named Thomas West, the 3rd Baron Delaware. Delaware, what's that sound like? He also died. He was lost at sea in a ship traveling back and forth. Another important name, as I said, this was like herding cats in that colony to start with, and they sent over a disciplinarian named Sir Thomas Gates, and he wrote a hellacious set of regulations. It was really pretty drastic. And they were having trouble getting people to go over there. Nobody wanted to get on tiny little boats and go across the Atlantic. So they looked for somebody that knew how to sell, kind of like an old-fashioned style of used car salesman or something. His name was Sir Edwin Sandys. And Mr. Sandys started an advertising campaign over in England, you know, a wonderful place, lots of land, you know, beautiful weather. And he set up something called head rights and share rights. Now remember, enclosure and all those things, land is kind of hard to get hold of in England. And a lot of people have this on their mind. So some people went over there, were invested in America just so they could get land of their own. The head right, the deal was, if you organize your family, you get them on a boat, you pay for your own passage and all that, you show up in the colonies, and pretty quickly Jamestown's going to spread out because it wasn't a nice place to live. So people started, well, first they moved Jamestown itself further inland to higher ground. Then they started establishing other little villages because the people had trouble, you know, just sitting there staring at each other, I guess. So if you showed up there with your family or your retainers or whatever, you would be given 50 acres of land. That started bringing some more people, but there were a lot of people that, I'm not sure, I really don't want to go. I'd sure like to have that land, so they did another thing called share right. And a share right is if you found some other sucker to go over there and bring his family and all that, but you paid for it, you also got 50 acres of land. That way. That was the share right. As they started cultivating more and more tobacco, that becomes their money and everything else. They didn't have cash. So if you were in trouble, you were penalized in bales of tobacco. If you wanted your daughter to have a dowry, that was bales of tobacco. Tobacco was everything. And as people realized that to make money they needed to cultivate more land, they're going to need labor, their families weren't enough, they didn't have a whole lot of big families. So you're going to start seeing another thing that Edwin Sandys promoted. If you don't have enough money to get to America, and you want a free ride, all you have to do is sign away yourself for 7 years to work for somebody as an indentured servant, and we'll send you over there. After 7 years, you're a free man, you can go get your own land and all of that sort of thing. It wasn't a very nice life. But at that time, there was unemployment, people were hungry, and all of that sort of thing, so they got quite a few people to go. 20, 30 years down the line, nobody's going to be volunteering to be an indentured servant anymore. And then, of course, they're going to supply them with another form of slavery. In fact, by 1619, the first Dutch ship kind of stops by Jamestown and offloads about 20 African slaves. And the strange thing about this is that Englishmen didn't have African slaves. So they're going, what do we do with them? And then they figured, well, we'll just treat them like indentured servants. So they did. And some of those early slaves that went over there were able to work themselves out of being a slave. Kind of like an indentured servant. Which explains something that nobody ever can quite understand, and that is, how come by the time of the American Civil War, 10% of the African Americans were free men? They didn't have the right to vote or anything, but they were free men. Where did they come from? That's part of the answer to that question. Now, as time went by, and there were fewer and fewer indentured servants, and the slaves became more and more important, the colonists started figuring out rationalizations why they shouldn't let them be free. And it's going to go very slowly. First, it's, remember the old reason that you could make them slaves? Because they were pagans. Well, when they convert to Christianity, do you have to let them go? So they didn't want to let them go, so they changed the law and said the law of being Christian doesn't make any difference. Then there's the little problem of men will be men, women will be women, and there were children coming from some of the white colonists and the slaves. So I had to make another law to rationalize that. What happens if they have kids? What are the kids? So they make a law that says that the child shall follow the status of the mother. So if the mother's a slave, the child's a slave. And of course, those white folks down there just never even thought about the other way around. But what if the mother's white and the father's black? And, you know, your southern aunts and uncles will say, oh, that could never happen. That's baloney. They just didn't talk about it. There's the general area on this map. You can still see the map, right? Okay. Where the Powhatan Confederacy spread out. Now, when these people got there, there were probably 20,000 people in various little tribes. Within, say, 15 or 20 years, they were down to about 3,000 or 4,000. Now, once again, no one's keeping census or records or anything like that. We figure a lot of them died from diseases that were brought over. We also, I would be willing to guess human beings aren't all stupid, but some of them just decided to decamp and go somewhere else to get away from those weird white people. It's hard to tell. But this was a general pattern all over the Americas. Maybe not quite as drastic in the Chesapeake Bay area as it was maybe down in South America, but it was bad. Okay, let's go north. Let me see if I can find a map. Up to this place. That's Cape Cod sticking out into the ocean there. It's like a big coat hook. Plymouth Colony. These people are motivated for different reasons. We'll talk about that just for half a second. The people who went to Virginia Colony, they were going there to get, you know, maybe get rich quick. And the people that go to Plymouth Colony go for different reasons, but how did they get there? They got there because someone gave them money. What did those people that backed this have in mind? They wanted to make money. The same as the ones that sent the people in Virginia. So you have to look at whose eyes you're looking through when you talk about why did someone go somewhere. In England, you had the Church of England. It was almost identical to the Catholic Church, except who the boss was. Some people thought, especially the ones that were followers of John Calvin, they thought they're too rich, they're too fancy, they're a rich man's church. We need to simplify the church. We need to get to basics like read the Bible, things like that. One group of these people were what we call the pilgrims. Pilgrims are just people who wander in search of something. That's all that means. In this case, the pilgrims were people who really didn't even want to have anything to do with the Church of England. And because of that, the Church of England was all over them. Because there were laws about going to church in England. Let me pop slides from it and I'll go back. 1559, there was an act called the Act of Uniformity. It was illegal not to attend the official Church of England. There was a fine of 1 shilling, that's about 24 bucks, for each missed Sunday and each missed holy day. Gotta remember to go to church on Easter, guys. The penalties included imprisonment and larger fines if you were trying to conduct an unofficial church service. Some non-conforming leaders were executed during the lifetime of James I. There's the problem for the pilgrims. So where do they go? They go over to the Low Countries. They go over to Holland because there are a lot of Calvinists over there. They figure it'll be safer. And that's what they did. They went over to a place. Well, they went to several places, but we always talk about the one city, the city of Leyden. It's spelled either L-E-I-D-E-N or L-E-Y-D-E-N, depending on how you feel that day. The only problem was that while the Dutch people were pretty nice to them, relatively speaking anyway, they wouldn't give them the full privileges of citizenship, and they couldn't get involved in any major businesses or anything. All they could do is like sit on the roadside and sell bric-a-brac and stuff like that. And their kids were starting to speak more Dutch than they were English. They didn't like that either. And they wanted to go somewhere where there were English-speaking people who felt the same way they did. And they noticed all the talk about Jamestown. It still wasn't doing real well, Jamestown. It probably had about in between 1,500 and 1,700 people in it, maximum. But of course, all the people like Sir Edwin Sandys are telling people how wonderful it is. These people are thinking, why don't we go do something like that? And they eventually make contact with representatives of the London Company and some other sponsors. And they decide that they're going to the Americas. They get sponsors. They get enough money to buy 2 ships. One of the ships was kind of small, made for coastal sailing, so they put bigger masts in it to make it, so they could put bigger sails and all that. And the engineering of that doesn't always work. And to make a really long story short, while they were relocating from Holland over to England to where they were going to depart for the Americas, that ship kind of pulled itself apart, started leaking, and they finally ended up with 1 ship. Everybody knows the name of the ship, right? That's in your little golden book of history. What's the name of the ship, Tahoka? Nobody knows. Come on. Your 3rd grade teacher taught you this. Nobody? Post?
Mayflower.
Yes, thank you. Did you just Google it? I can't see you. Did you bring that out of your brain, or did you get prompted by somebody? Anyway, I don't answer the question. The Mayflower. And they're going to have a long, rough voyage. At least 1 person dies on the ship on the way across. Pretty small ships, pretty rough water. I've been across the Atlantic. It's not fun in the wintertime. Now, the plan was to get there in the summertime and plant crops. And this group was ready to set up a colony. Men, women, even some children. But one thing they found, these Calvinist people found, was we don't have enough experts on different areas, and we need to bring some along. And since we don't have any of those people in our group, we're gonna have to take some outsiders with us. So they started having kind of two groups. One group are the believers, they call themselves the saints, why not? And the other group they call the strangers. You know, if you need a guy that can do metal work, then you go out and get somebody to come along. They brought a guy that was supposed to be in charge of security for him by the name of Miles Standish. You don't need to remember his name unless you're interested in the stories. But he was kind of going to organize their self-defense force or whatever you want to call it. Well, the weather was bad. They hit the coast of North America, right where that map was that I showed you. Right at the tip end of that ugly-looking little cape that all people from Massachusetts love so much, called Cape Cod. To get out of the boats, you can't imagine how much they wanted out of the boats. It's like, you know, being on COVID isolation and being let free at the end of it. They wanted out of the boats. They didn't want to see each other if they could possibly do that. But they were on a sandy, rocky place. Their security chief got out. They were also getting hungry because they were running out of food. It either spoils or you eat it all, one of the two. Some of their people went up along the arm of Cape Cod and they found some food. It was in baskets up on stands. Little baskets, there was corn and some beans and stuff like that. And wow, that's, you know, God must have sent us food. So they grabbed it and they noticed as they were going back to the ship that there were a bunch of angry people chasing after them because what they'd just done is rob a grave. It was a burial platform. And I guess they put food on it, you know, to help people make their way to the whatever their version of heaven is. They made a few mistakes like that, but the big thing was when they looked around, there was no way they could land there. I mean, there was no way they could raise crops there. It's already December because of all the delays over the boats and all of that. Instead of getting there in the summer, they didn't get there until December. No way you're going to grow crops. What are we going to do? The saints get in the little corner of the boat. The other people don't get to vote. And the saints had to decide, are we going to stop here? Because we're not where we're supposed to be. We're north of it. We've calculated we're way too far north. So we're outside of our charter area. We don't have a charter for this location. So we could just all load back on the boat and go back out into that nice, nasty sea and go south. But everyone went, nah, I don't think so. So they made their decision to try and find a place right where they were, in the area they were, that was a little bit more hospitable than the end of this cape. And they eventually moved into the location that became Plymouth, named after the British seaport, Plymouth. And pretty quickly, in the first year, the first month, they're going to build a stockade, they're going to live inside it, they're going to get some other high ground, and they're going to, I guess they had a cannon or something from the ship, and they're going to put it up on that hill as their defense works. Can you imagine they're crammed in this little stockade, and they're probably not any bigger than this room, and I bet they got tired of that really fast, and eventually they're going to make contact with some of the indigenous people. The first group they're going to bump into are people called Wampanoags. If you look at that map, that red arrow is pointing at Wampanoag territory. It's got a number of the different tribes there. If you look at the right-hand side of the map where the hook is, there's another tribe named there called the Nausetts. They were extinct by the time the colonists got there, except for one. One of them was living
Your
with
conference is scheduled to end in 2 minutes.
His name was Tisquantum. He'd been kidnapped by the Spanish. He'd gone all the way to Europe on a Spanish ship, somehow got free of them, made his way all the way across Europe, learning all these European languages as he went. Made it to England and figured out how to get on a ship and come back to America. maybe on a fishing ship or something like that. Then he walked out and stuns the colonists by saying, "Hello, how are you?" And they're going, "How did he learn to speak English?" That will be, Tisquantum is his name, we call him Squanto. And he'll be kind of the intermediary between them and a guy named Massasoit, who's the most influential of the Wampanoag. And they will, for a number of years, form a fairly harmonious group together with the Wampanoags. The Wampanoags will teach them how to grow some crops, also bring them some food until they can become self-sufficient. And I don't know why the machine shut me off about 5 minutes early, but maybe it doesn't like hearing my voice. I'm afraid it's going to cut us off, so maybe I better just quit right now while we're still ahead. So next class, we're going to go really fast through this colony. We're going to talk about Massachusetts Bay Colony. We'll see how much further we can go, because we have to start talking about the colonies as they develop. If you look in your readings, there's a chart comparing the different regions, north, central, and south. Look at that. There's also a thing that compares what the Spanish colonies were like, the French colonies, the Dutch colonies, and the English colonies. Look at those. That'll kind of give you a picture of what's going on. And pay attention to who has the biggest populations. Okay, anybody got questions in here, in this room? How about out in Never Never Land? Anybody got questions out there? Problems? What's the meaning of life, Mr. Hunt? I told you the meaning of life already. It's 42. You don't believe it?
What does that mean?
Google it. Just say the meaning of life is 42 in Google and see what it tells you. Okay. Peace. Quiz 3 is due on Friday at witching hour.
I was gonna do the, quiz 1 and 2.
You couldn't get into it?
Yesterday, but I didn't have time because I went out with my dad to go dove hunting.
Oh, that's rough.
Yeah.
Break my heart. Get it done. It's available. All the quizzes are up and available right now, but that won't always be true, because you kind of need to learn to get them in on time. So after a while, they're just going to disappear, and that'll just be a 0 if you don't get it done. Question, I heard a question. Someone just saying goodbye?
See you Wednesday.
Take care. See y'all Wednesday.
See you.
Your conference is scheduled to end in 2 minutes. Your conference is now over. Goodbye.